everyone. Welcome to this session on engineering management. My name is Sangeeta Nori. And if you're joining me here today, it's probably because you're curious about the role of an engineering manager. Maybe you already are one and you want to get another perspective. Or maybe you're considering whether you should be one and you want to know what this job entails. Or perhaps you work closely with one and you want to just understand the role more. Regardless of your reason, I hope you'll find a thing or two to take away from this talk. But before we dig in, I just want to share a little bit about my background. So I'm originally from India. I was born and I grew up in a city in South India called Hyderabad. And I've been in the IT industry for 20 plus years, all of them in the Atlanta area. And my career path in IT is what some would call traditional. So I studied computer engineering in college, and my first job out was as a back-end engineer coding in C++. And over a couple of years, I went on to learn Java and started building enterprise Java applications on WebLogic and WebSphere, the application servers back in the day, the pre-cloud days. And then when cloud technologies came around and matured, I started building full-stack applications for the cloud. Along the way, I moved from being a junior to a mid-level engineer, senior, tech lead, and then last couple years, I've been doing engineering management. Currently, I'm a senior engineering manager at Nordstrom, supporting one of their e-commerce teams. So the idea for this talk, the idea even for the title of this talk, came to me when I was a new engineering manager. And in those first couple weeks and months when I realized that this engineering manager job role is so much more, it goes way beyond what these two words lead you to believe. And that's what I want to talk about today. So the way I think about engineering management is that it is a pie with three major pieces to it. The first piece, of course, is the technical piece, where you're focused on building the software product. You're looking at things from an engineering lens, and your typical engineering concerns like architecture, design, security, performance, scaling. And for someone like me who was an engineer before, this was the most familiar, the most comfortable part of the pie. The second piece is the business piece, where you're looking at the product from the lens of market, from the lens of the customer. How is your product going to deliver business value? How is your product going to drive outcomes, business outcomes? This is where you are maybe partnering with your key stakeholders and you're defining roadmaps, delivery roadmaps, product roadmaps. You are working with things like OKRs and KPIs, usability studies, experimentation, skills that typically one learns in a business or management program. Now, for a techie like me, I was not familiar with all these business terminology and in the beginning, but again, it was not something that I couldn't figure out with some training and learning and support. Now, the third piece that was different, the people management piece, this is where you are, as a manager, expected to support every person on your team, day in, day out, on so many different levels. Levels that you can't even imagine when you step into the role. Things like conflict resolution, psychological safety, career progression. So, to me, arguably, this people management piece is the most important piece of that EM pie. Because this is where the true test and the expectation of a leader comes in. Because this is where, as a manager, you have to energize and motivate your team to accomplish great things. This is where you have to create an impact through your team beyond what each individual on your team can achieve on their own. That's heady stuff. And I'm going to argue, actually, that people management has grown in importance. It's even more important now in this pandemic and post-pandemic times because perspectives have shifted. Knowledge workers, that's me, that's you, all of us, we are increasingly demanding a workplace that is more just, more equitable, balanced, respectful. Right, think about the recent workplace trends. I'm sure you may have heard of them, right? The Great Resignation, the Great Breakup, quiet quitting, quiet constraint. All these trends are sending an unmistakable signal that we knowledge workers, we are looking for a transformation in the workplace. And people management is at the center of it. And engineering managers, we are in a unique position, a position of power and responsibility where we can build those type of workplaces for our teams. So it's important, and it's important now. So if everything I said got you excited and you feel, yes, I want to be an engineering manager, and you want to roll up your sleeves and dig in, well, let me give you the difficult part here. It's also the most challenging piece of this EM pie. Why? Well, simply put, it's that blue dot, it's people. We all know anything that deals with humans, it's just automatically more complex. It is unpredictable and uncertain, full of surprises, tricky, and sometimes just messy, right? People, right? Dealing with people. Let me speak to some specific reasons why people management is so challenging. The first reason, the problems in this space are hard to define and even harder to measure. Take, for example, foster a great team culture. It's part of every manager, every leader's job description. Yet, how do you define and how do you measure it? If I were to ask you right now, how good is the culture on your team today? Maybe we all can figure out and say something, reasonable. But if I were to ask you, is it better or worse than what it was a year ago? By how much? We all would struggle to answer that question, and that's why it's hard. The second reason, there's no standard recipes or playbook in this space. I mean, we techies, we love to solve a problem, we love to solve it well once, we love to take those lessons learned, create a best practice, create a playbook, and keep repeating that solution over and over. That's what we techies love to do. But guess what? The problem space in people management, it's constantly shifting on you. So you can't do that. As a manager, if I figure out what's going to energize and motivate one engineer on my team, I cannot apply that to the other engineer on my team. Heck, I'd be very lucky if what works for one engineer at one time works for that same engineer another time. That's the challenge of people management. And the third reason, in my opinion, this is the kicker. You can't easily ask for help, or you can't delegate these problems away like you can in the other two pieces. On the technical piece, if I'm stumped on a technical question, I can go to my tech lead, I can go to my senior engineer and get some help. On the business piece, if I'm stumped on a business question, my product, program, project manager can come in and help me out, perhaps. But in this space, I cannot tap on the shoulder of my peer manager and say, hey, can you improve the culture on my team? Can you resolve conflict between two engineers on my team? I can't do that. And that can feel very lonely. To someone that's not expecting to solve those types of problems, that can be quite a mental load. So if everything I said made the people management side of things seem very scary, that was not the intent. I just wanted to kind of underscore and call out that it's full of surprises, things that I hadn't known when I stepped into this role, so I wanted to share that out. So if, I guess, you were to ask me to sum it all up, what does it feel like? Well, on the worst days, I'm giving it my 110% and I'm getting nowhere. But then there's good news. On the better days, I feel like I've got it. I'm on top of things. I figured out how to keep this ball rolling, only to fall down and then realize that I need to pick myself back up and do it all over again. But then you may be the type of person like me who loves this type of challenge, and you might thrive being an engineering manager. So what I want to do for the rest of this talk is I want to share some insights from my experience of coming into an engineering manager role, and also some insights that I gathered from talking to other people, other managers in my orbit. So 2 disclaimers. Every talk needs disclaimers. So 2 disclaimers before we get in. One, the insights I share are based on my experiences of coming into the EM role from the tech or engineering side. Now, if someone is coming into the EM role from another direction, these examples or insights may not resonate for them. The second disclaimer, I talk more about things I had to unlearn than things I had to learn. Because we all know it's always harder to unlearn something than it is to learn something, right? Because you have to work consciously, you have to reprogram that memory, you have to walk back things. And a lot of times, these things that you're trying to unlearn, they're counterintuitive. They go against your established beliefs, something you've held true for a long time. So with that, let's dig into the talk. And I want to start off by talking about 2 rules that I had to think about differently when I became an engineering manager. The first one is treat all people equally. This rule I'm especially passionate about because sadly, in my 20+ year career, I've had more than one manager who played favorites. You probably also have experienced one, right? They didn't treat everyone equally on the team. And this was many, many years ago. I don't quite remember all the details, but I still can't forget how that made me feel. You can probably guess I was not his favorite. And like Maya Angelou famously said, you may forget what people said, you may forget what people did, but you never forget how they made you feel. And so at that time, when I had that manager, I thought to myself, if I were to ever become an engineering manager, I will have no favorites. Treat everyone equally on my team. And I did that when I was new. But the way I think about this rule and the way I apply it now has evolved. Take, for example, one-on-one time. If you were to treat everyone equally on your team, managers do the one-on-ones, you have to give equal one-on-one time to everyone on your team. But now the way I think about it is, there's a junior person on my team or someone new that needs more of my time, more of my support. And maybe there's a seasoned senior engineer on my team who prefers a more ad hoc style of communication or maybe a half hour every other week. At the face of it, I'm not treating them equally, but I'm giving them equal access to my time. I'm letting them choose. In my book, that is treating them equitably. I've given them equal access. They come and tell me how much of it they want to use. Take another example. Let's say you're a manager and you're planning to send your team to a conference like this one. To treat everyone equally would mean you would either send them all or send none. But what if there are some engineers on your team who love coming to a conference like this, who can take away a lot of stuff, who thrive in a place like this, making connections? Maybe there's others on your team who would much rather have a subscription to a learning platform. So again, you're giving equal access to resources and letting them choose. So that's treating them equitably rather than strictly equally. The next rule is kind of related to the previous one, and it is the golden rule. I'm sure all of us have heard this, since we were kids. Treat others the way you want to be treated. The problem with applying this rule in a workplace is that it maps your preferences onto your team. So if my personality is such that I love to work on new projects, I love a change constantly, I want to work on the next thing, or maybe I like to receive my feedback instantly or my recognition publicly, I can't map those preferences to my team. My team may or may not want that. So if you are an engineering manager, you should take the time to understand what motivates and energizes each and every one of your engineer and treat them the way they want to be treated. I mean, it seems so simple, but you'd be surprised how many managers and leaders I've seen treat the team thinking that they are acting in the team's best interest, but they've never bothered to ask if the team really wants that or not. So it's simple, but it's easy to ignore. Next, I want to talk about some common new manager traps, and God knows I've fallen in all of these as I learn the ropes. The first one is doing your team's work. And this one, especially techies, if you're an engineer before and you moved into an EM role, you fall into this one bad. Because up until that point, you would have moved from being a junior to a mid-level to a senior engineer, and you're used to doing the same work that you were doing before, but at a higher scale. But then when you move into an engineering manager role, you forget that you've shifted lanes. You forget that now this is a different role with different goals. The goal now is to not do the work of your team. The goal now is to enable your team to do the work. But why do managers keep, at least some, not all, but why do some managers keep doing that? Two reasons. One, old habits die hard. Old habits are comfortable. They just know how to write code, so they continue to do that, or at least continue to prioritize that. And two, there's this notion that being a hands-on technical manager is good, that somehow being hands-on is going to make you successful in the role. And nothing against that. I have nothing against being hands-on. But you have to set the right boundaries. I made that mistake when I was a new manager of not setting the right boundaries. I volunteered to code key features, never have enough time for it, struggle to find the time, so I would try to code between meetings in the evenings or the weekends. My work-life balance took a hit, but that was not the worst part. Because I did not have enough time, I would reach out to my team for help. I would finish the coding part, and then I would ask another engineer on my team, hey, can you write the unit tests? Can you write the integration test? Can you do the DevOps, support UAT deployment? And that was not right. What I thought was help, it was actually a burden for my team. It was not a blessing. And it's interesting how I understood what I was doing was wrong. I mean, it was thanks to some powerful feedback, subtle but powerful feedback that I got from my tech lead. So she comes to me and she says, Sangeeta, me and a couple others on the team, we are wondering, how do you handle management and coding? How do you do it all? I remember at the time feeling good at the question. I thought she was paying me a compliment. Oh, I do it all. It took me a while to realize what she was really trying to say. Don't do it all. So if you're a new engineering manager, it's really important that you figure out how you can enable your team to do their work rather than doing your team's work. The next trap, being friendly and not being a friend. New engineering managers, or maybe even the more tenured engineering managers, we are insecure. We don't know how well we are doing our jobs, especially coming from an engineer role. I mean, the success is so clear when you are an engineer, but when you're an engineering manager, it's hard to tell what success looks like. So a lot of times you look to other indicators, other proxies for success. I mean, you all probably know about, anonymous surveys. A lot of workplaces have that where the teams take the anonymous survey and give feedback to their manager. They score their manager. I remember how nervous I was before getting the results from my first anonymous survey from my team. I remember thinking, will my score be high enough? Will my score be better or worse than my peers? Does my team like me more? In my head, it felt like a popularity contest. It's not one, but it felt like it. And again, because we are insecure, like I said. So maybe in order to preserve that score, or maybe to boost it, or maybe for other well-intentioned reasons, a lot of new managers, they are very friendly with their team on the face of it, right? But being friendly, it makes them stop from having the tough conversations, from giving that constructive, candid, maybe critical feedback. Because you're thinking, if I'm going to tell them something they don't want to hear, I'm going to get, the survey results are not going to look good for me. But here's the counterintuitive part. Most people would rather know than not when they need to improve something, as long as that feedback is given in the proper way. So if you're a new engineering manager, figuring out how you can have that tough conversation with your team, how can you deliver that critical feedback, how can you stretch your team beyond their comfort, that's important. And that's how you're going to be a friend. So don't stop at being friendly. Try and become truly a friend. The next trap I want to talk about is giving your task assignments to your top or A players. All teams have their mix of A, B, and C players. I mean, Adam Grant, in one of his popular TED Talks, he calls them the givers, the matchers, and the takers. So your A players are your most skilled, most reliable engineers, people on the team. They are the people that the rest of the team is trying to get help from, so their net is a give to the team. Your matchers, they give some help, they take some help, so they are your B players right there in the middle. Your C players are your least skilled, needing the most help from the team, so they are the takers from the team. Now, if you're a project manager or if you're a tech lead, you're optimizing for delivery. Your goal is to ship the code. So you're constantly giving your most important, challenging pieces of work to your A players. But then when you step into an engineering manager role, again, remember, it's a different role, different goals. Your goal now is to make your entire team resilient, spread the knowledge, build everyone up, build your C players to the B and B players to the A level. And in order to do that, you need to take the time and spread those important tasks give them to the B and C players. But giving them the task is not enough. You've got to give them the time and the training so they can succeed doing those tasks. But everybody's running up against a deadline. So the thing to watch out for here is, oh, just this one deadline is so important. I can't take the time now. I'm going to let my A players handle it. Trust me, there never comes a good deadline that's going to let you take that time. So you just have to make it a priority, make it happen, and focus on building up your entire team. The next new manager trap relates to speaking. Now, any of us who are in an IT industry, right, no matter your job role, you're probably constantly given the advice, speak more, bring forth your ideas, propose a solution, propose a design, talk about things, lead discussions, present. So we are constantly dialing up our speaking skills, especially, speaking to a room. But then when you step into an engineering manager role, you have to dial down on that speaking and you have to dial up on the listening. Because active listening is now a key enabler of success in this new role. Sadly, I see a lot of engineering managers dominating the conversations on their teams. And when they do that, there's two problems. One, when a manager speaks first and offers a solution or an idea, the rest of the team tends not to counter it. So by speaking first, they have inadvertently suppressed the conversation on their team. And second, if the manager is doing all the talking, then they are not doing the listening, which is key for them to be successful. So my suggestion, if one is an engineering manager, is to speak less. And if you do find yourself speaking, maybe ask an insightful question. Lead your team to a solution rather than giving them the solution. And if you do find yourself offering a solution or an idea, remember to let your team go first. You go last. Now, there's one important exception here. There's one important area where the manager needs to speak up first and speak up forcefully. And we'll look at that in the next section. The last new manager trap I want to talk about is this feeling that compels them to do it all. Now, when you step into the role of an engineering manager, suddenly the scope of work you're managing has increased. It has ballooned, depending on how big your team size is. And because of that, you're going to get copied on a ton of email. You're going to get invited to a ton of meetings. And you feel compelled that you have to read every single email, attend every single meeting, read up on all the Slack threads. And that can be quite overwhelming. You feel like you're drowning. And do that if you must. If you're new to the team, if you're new to the company, you need to build yourself that context, definitely do that. But over time, it's important that you figure out how you can prioritize and just limit yourself to the important stuff. Otherwise, you're going to be lost in the details. You're going to be lost in the vast minutiae, ocean of information, and you might miss something important. So figuring out how you can prioritize and pay attention to the right stuff, that's a critical skill when you are in this role. Let's shift gears. Let's talk about building a great team culture. Now, culture is such an important attribute of a workplace. Nobody wants to work for a team or a company with poor culture. So let's start by defining what culture is. Now, if you search for it online, the most common definition you'll find is that it is a collection of values, attitudes, and beliefs that an organization holds important and the employee behaviors it translates into. I mean, that was easy. I think we all get what it is. I mean, most companies have core values, right? So that kind of defines the culture for the organization. What makes a great culture? This one was harder for me to find the definition. I searched online, I read several articles, but no single definition spoke to me, kind of resonated with me. The best definition I found was actually in a conversation with a leader at Nordstrom who said, and I quote, "Great team culture is that which enables team success while keeping people personally attached to the purpose, vision, and to each other." The reason I love this definition of great culture is because it directly points to the foundational, the building blocks of a great culture, and I've underlined them here. It's keeping people attached to the purpose and vision, and that is the culture at a macro level, and keeping people attached to each other, that is the culture at a micro level. And it's important to strengthen and work on the culture at both the macro and the micro level. And engineering managers, we play a key role. We are the stewards of culture at the micro level, at the team level. And like any good steward, it's really important that we first clearly understand and then define and then embody the culture that we seek to build on our team. So how do you do that? How do we build a great team culture? Well, we are data-driven people, right? So we want to first collect data. If great culture is founded on strong connections, we have to be in the places where those connections happen. And for an engineering manager, that means being in the places where your team is getting its work done. And that is the brainstorming sessions, the design reviews, the code reviews, the sprint planning meetings. The managers have to be in those meetings. Now, most managers are on the escalation calls or the program reviews, etc., because they are high visibility, high stakes, and rightly so, they need to be there to support the team. But not many managers make time to attend all the other routine meetings. But I suggest you go to them. Now, you might say, hey, wait a minute, the last point you said in the last slide was that don't go to all the meetings, and now you're telling me go to all the meetings? How do I do that? That's where the second thing comes in. Build yourself a network of canaries. Now, canary, if you didn't know, is a small songbird. It was used in the mining industry way back when. The bird was sent down into the mine to do a health check. And if you're familiar with canary deployments, IT industry has borrowed the concept of a canary and used it. So I'm using it here in a different sense. The way I'm using it here is the canaries in here are the trusted individuals who can be in those meetings where you can't be, but who can come back and tell you, alert you when an intervention is needed. These are the trusted team members that you need to identify and cultivate. And the more senior a leader you are, the more important it is that you have this network of canaries. Okay, now you've gathered the information. What do you do next? Well, it's time to analyze and assess. So you analyze and assess the quality of connections. How are your team members interacting with each other? And then, of course, you take action. You promote the positive connections that are contributing to a stronger workplace, and then you forcefully denounce the negative connections that are undermining the culture on your team. As simple as that. Collect data, analyze it, and act on it. Let's look at some specific examples. What do I mean by that? The first thing is, you need to, in order to build a blameless culture on your team, you need to normalize failure. We all live in a world that constantly celebrates success, and failure is rarely talked about, right? It's usually swept under the rug. Even in our workplaces, our processes, our systems, the way we do work, they celebrate success. Think about it, in the all hands meetings, in the big review meetings, the successful projects are given a shout out and called out. You see the successful teams getting the visibility, the successful engineers getting promoted. We don't have processes and systems in our workplaces that are forgiving of failure. How often have you seen someone get promoted because they worked hard, really hard on something, and yet they failed? Doesn't happen. So, how then can you build a culture where not only is taking risks tolerated, but it is encouraged? Well, you have to talk about failure. If you've heard Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix, in one of his books, he gives this suggestion. He says, whisper your wins, shout your mistakes. Whisper your wins, shout your mistakes. And I think it's really important for managers and leaders to do that publicly. But it's very hard, right? I mean, think about it, how difficult it is to stand in front of people and admit to your mistake. It's hard. It goes against human instinct of self-preservation. So how then can you build an atmosphere on your team where people come forward and talk about their mistakes? Well, you create a process for it, and you make it second nature. I've seen different managers do it differently. The most dramatic one, I talked to someone who said they have a wall of shame. I mean, it's a digital wall of shame, not quite, a literal wall of shame, but a digital wall of shame where any employee who makes a mistake that they want to talk about, they wear it as a badge of honor, they come stick it on that wall of shame and they talk about it. We don't do anything that dramatic on my team. We go with a more subtle approach. On my team, we have a meeting every 2 weeks, just the engineers, no other stakeholders, where we are encouraged to talk about the mistakes. What goals did we miss? What tasks did we not complete? Why? And what are the lessons learned? Non-judgmental way, as much as possible, right? And if you build that system, if you build that process, I guarantee your team is going to benefit. They're going to warm up to it, and they're going to benefit from it. Psychological safety, that's a term that's in fashion these days. You see a lot of articles written about it. This term was actually coined by a Harvard researcher. And the definition, at least the way it was coined, was that it's the feeling that you will not be punished, you will not be retaliated. When you are bold and you speak up and you offer an opinion, when you ask a question, or when you offer an idea, that feeling, that is psychological safety. How do you build psychological safety on your teams? It's a tricky one. And the way that I found most effective is to watch how feedback is given and exchanged between your team members. And I'm not talking about the anonymous feedback that probably a lot of you do during performance review cycles, the 360 feedback. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the written feedback in the form of code review comments or design review document comments. I'm talking about verbal feedback, the exchange, again, in meetings. This goes back to the manager being in those brainstorming sessions, those design reviews, etc. And when you're in those meetings, if you hear something being said that is bordering on judgmental or making it personal, you need to step in and you need to coach your team so that you can improve the etiquette of how feedback is given. As an example, let's say you're in a meeting and you hear maybe a senior engineer, let's say the junior engineer is proposing some kind of solution they came up with. And if you hear someone in the room going, oh, this design, I can think of so many reasons why this wouldn't work. It's got so many flaws. It's done like a rookie. It looks like you have no experience building something like this. You can immediately tell there's a lot of judgment. They are making that feedback personal. They could have delivered that in a much better way. And if you hear that, it's your job to pull that person aside that's giving that kind of feedback and coach them. So now one thing I've noticed here is sometimes the superstar engineers on the team, like the ones who do all the work, who have been there the longest time, they somehow get a pass on good behavior. It's like they're so busy, they're solving all the problems, they don't have time to be nice. That's just ridiculous, right? Nobody should get a pass on good behavior. And as a manager, this is one place where you have to treat everyone equally and you have to hold everybody to the same bar of etiquette, no matter how senior or junior you are. Next, I want to talk about microaggressions. I'm not a fan of this word microaggressions because the word micro makes it seem like the harmful impact of the aggression is somehow minimal or small, when the fact is the aggression may be subtle, but the impact of it, the cumulative impact of it on the person at the receiving end, it's usually not small. It's not micro at all. Being a woman, I've endured my share of microaggressions. Back when I was not a tech lead, I was not a senior engineer, I remember, when I put my hand up and said, hey, I want to own the design for this big functionality or big piece. I remember my team lead asking, are you sure you can handle this by yourself? I mean, you've never done this before. Are you sure you can do this all by yourself? And that made me feel like somehow I wasn't qualified. I felt like I did everything to make the lead realize that I'm just as qualified as the other person on the team, but the lead wasn't getting that. And I didn't know the definition of microaggression, so I didn't realize that was what it was. But nevertheless, it still made me feel like I didn't belong. And the problem with these microaggressions is they come wrapped in such a supportive envelope, right? I mean, if you think about it, the lead was asking me, do you need help? And so the person saying that doesn't even realize that they're doing something, that their actions and words are actually pushing the other person away. They don't even realize it. Because at the root of most of these microaggressions is that unconscious bias. I'm sure we've all heard of it. I'm sure we've all taken some training about unconscious bias, but it's amazing how it creeps in to these microaggressions. But here's the good news. Most people who have these unconscious biases, they don't know. If you give them feedback, they are very receptive to it. So if you notice, and that's the thing about engineering manager, you have that opportunity to have one-on-one conversation with your engineers. So if you realize that there's maybe an unconscious bias in someone which is causing them to say or do things that are bordering on microaggressions, you have the window where you can coach them through it, and that's your job. So, but that only happens if you're paying attention. So pay attention, see where those unconscious biases are lurking in your team, and coach them through it, and most people are very receptive to that kind of feedback. And the last thing I want to talk about here is incentives and how they can go so wrong. I mean, we all love incentives, who doesn't? But let me tell you, there's enough number of studies that show that the wrong incentives, they actually backfire. Not only do you not get the results that you were hoping to get, they actually ruin the culture on your team. And you ask how? Well, here's how. As the manager, you define what success looks like on your team. So let's say you define success for your engineers on the team by saying it's the number of lines of code that they write, or the number of merge requests, pull requests they commit, or number of bugs they solve. Guess what's going to happen? Your engineers are basically going to try and game the system. They're going to want to win. Because of the way you define success, it's going to introduce an unhealthy competitive culture on your team. So instead of actually solving things together and achieving the team's goals, you've pitted them against one another. So it's really important that you define success the right way, and you think about what kind of things you're incentivizing, because that's going to have an impact on culture. It's a straight line. It's not even a dotted line. It's a straight line of how you define success to how good the culture is on your team. So, all right, next, shift gears again. And this is the last big segment I want to talk about, that is career growth and development. And the first point here, rock stars and superstars. So in the book Radical Candor, and if you've not read the book and if you're a manager, highly recommend. It's good even otherwise. So in that book, Radical Candor, the author Kim Scott, she talks about a leader at Apple describing two types of people on teams, the rock stars and the superstars. The rock stars are your people who are happy with where they are, they're happy with the team, they're happy with the work, they're happy with the pace at which they're doing work. They reliably get things done. In other words, they are dependable like a rock stars. Superstars, on the other hand, constantly need to be challenged. They want to move on to the next big thing. They run after the next visible project, the shiny new technology. They are on a steep trajectory, career progression trajectory. Superstars. A lot of times, managers and leadership looks at the superstars as being highly motivated, as highly engaged, because they're constantly putting their hand up. And they frown on the rock stars as lacking in ambition, lacking in engagement, while that's not true. Just because you're happy doing what you're doing and you're happy with the team you're on, that should not be construed as disengagement. And when you misunderstand that, and when you try to push your rock stars into being superstars, be careful, you might just push them away from the team. You have to recognize that everybody on your team is on their own path to growing. So it's important that you support your team members the way they want to be supported. And not necessarily does career progression mean promotions all the time. So you have to think about what it is that the team members are really looking for and support them the way they want to be supported. The next thing I want to talk about is promotions for the wrong reasons. And the first one is when people get promoted into engineering manager role from a senior engineer only because that was viewed as the next level up in their organization. There was not a viable career path for them to grow technically while staying as an individual contributor. Now, fortunately, most workplaces have fixed that. There's career ladders where someone can stay technical and continue to grow in an individual contributor space. But when this happens, when people get promoted into engineering manager roles, it's bad for two reasons. One, it's bad for them because they are not ready for this challenge, perhaps. It was not what they were expecting. And two, it's bad for the team because they won't be able to support the team in the way that they should be supporting. The second kind of promotion that I've seen which doesn't quite work is when you promote people too quickly, usually based on the need of the organization or the team rather than the readiness of the individual. And I've seen this usually happen on teams which are growing quickly. So let's say you're having new team members join every month. And to support your growing team, you need new leads, you need new managers to support that team. So it's very tempting. It's very tempting to ask the engineer who's been on the project for a year and ask them, hey, can you be the lead? Or maybe you ask the lead, hey, can you also be the manager on this team? And the operating assumption in these types of promotions is that you give a stretch assignment to somebody, they're going to figure it out, they're going to scale up, and they're going to do it. But the problem, again, with engineering management, it's that people management part, which is tricky. So it's not easy to just scale up and figure it out. So someone has to be mentally ready for that challenge. So we should watch for those type of promotions. And the last thing I want to talk about here is some blind spots in performance evaluation. As a manager, performance evaluation is probably the most important thing that you're going to do for them. And there's some blind spots, 3 blind spots that I want to call out here. The first one, so if a lot of engineers, they constantly get tapped on their shoulders to do some unplanned ad hoc work, right? Like another team comes to you, asks for help. It's not something that was planned. And if your engineer doesn't document that or doesn't put that in their performance evaluation write-up, as a manager, you don't know about it, and that doesn't get counted in performance evaluation. So encourage your team to maintain a brag sheet. I think everybody should do that. I mean, you can call it a brag sheet, a journal, whatever it is, but keep track of those contributions that are unplanned and ad hoc. I mean, anything that you were supposed to work on is hopefully captured in some system somewhere, and your manager can get that. But all this unplanned work doesn't get counted in performance evaluation. So make sure you've got a brag sheet and you're writing things down. And it's easy. You are in the flow of things, you forget. I've seen so many folks, I remember for them. I tell them, hey, but remember back then you did this. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Let me put that now in my evaluation. The second thing is, we are data-driven. We love our metrics. We like to make decisions based on data. So it's very tempting as an engineering manager to compare engineers on your team based on how many features they delivered or how many bugs they fixed. What if you have an engineer who delivered 5 features and another one who delivered 3, but the person who delivered 3 features was a mentor and helped maybe 4 other engineers deliver their features? That's not captured in the system. So if you go strictly by what's in the system, you're going to think that this other person, the first person, was the better performer. So it's important that you seek out that type of information. It's not readily available somewhere. So you got to do the work. You got to put in the effort to find that about your team and incorporate that in the performance evaluation. And the last thing that I want to call out here is, not all of us are English majors. Not all of us can write a beautiful paragraph eloquently talking about what we did all year long. So get past that flowery language and try to analyze the performance and the contributions of your engineers in an objective manner. Okay, so to close out the talk, 2 more rules that I'm going to urge you to think about differently as an engineering manager. The first one, you can do anything you set your mind to. I mean, that's an awesome quote to live your life by. But As a manager, again, you have to recognize when someone on your team is hitting a wall, when they are hitting a limit, and they're simply not able to perform their job. And that happens for various reasons. Sometimes the skills of an individual, the skills they possess, the talents they possess, are just not a good match to what the job demands, in spite of all the training and support. And when that happens, as the manager, you have to swiftly, step in. You have to nudge them to try something different. And hopefully they'll be successful in a different role, different company. Now, the trap I see most folks falling into here is they want to give more time. Maybe if I give another month, another quarter, this engineer will improve. But a lot of times, that delay is not because they truly believe that this other person can improve. They know that they've tried their best. It's because they don't have the courage or conviction. They are delaying because they are trying to muster that courage or conviction. But remember this, the more you're delaying, your team is paying the price. And the last thing is this concept of work teams thinking of themselves as a work family. Traditionally, a lot of work teams think of themselves as a family. And that's good. I mean, we want strong connections between teams. But then again, we have to remember that the team exists in order to achieve business outcomes. And in order to achieve great business outcomes, you need the best player in every role on your team. So it's more appropriate to think of the team as a professional sports team rather than as a family. And again, this idea was I heard it first from Reed Hastings, again, the CEO of Netflix. And I love this because it's been my North Star as I stepped into the management career, because it reminds me that while the individuals on the team are important, but what's really more important is the overall health of the team and the team's success. So that's the last one I had. Again, I want to call out that nothing I shared in today's talk is, groundbreaking or novel. I mean, you've all probably heard this before or read about it before, but here's the challenge. As with everything else in life, it's not the knowing, it's the practicing. It's the practicing of all these things every single day with every single team member. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your time and attention. I hope you enjoyed it. I look forward to your feedback. You can tweet at Nori Sangeeta. I don't think anyone uses email anymore, but I'm here at the conference rest of day today, tomorrow. So this is the second time I'm giving the talk. The first time was at Connect.Tech in September. I got some great feedback, and I kind of took that into the talk and improved it. So I welcome all your thoughts so I can, improve this and maybe take it other places. Thank you, everybody.